Thank you so much. You know, gentlemen, we've had like a wave of silence since Barack Obama started speaking this afternoon. I suppose his charismatic nature and the sense that he really makes you sit down and listen to what he has to say. Professor Ndlekiana, what were your notions on some of the most important aspects of Obama's speech?
Well, I think the most important thing about what he means is that he's also an iconic leader. The first African-American president of the U.S., whose father came from Kenya, and being president in a country that had a very long history of racism, slavery. So for Obama to have been elected president marked a transformative moment in the psyche of the Americans, that they could embrace the other person whom previously, especially white America, thought was inferior. So his presidency was very iconic. That is why he got the Nobel Prize. So he matches Mandela in that historical significance. So it was quite appropriate that they would have him to deliver this lecture today. And his speech, I think, lived up to the significant historical nature of the moment, in that he told us that over a period of 100 years, the world transformed quite magnificently, right? From slavery, from gender oppression, from lack of voting rights, politics, the economy, and technology transformed. The message embedded in that particular point is that if you can change the world in the way that you did, it means that society has an inherent propeller, right, or catalyst towards change. So whatever challenges you might be facing now, you can still change because you have a memory. You see, memory is very important. Always remembering, because that act of remembering tells you that because you come from these people who had achieved this much, so you too can achieve. That is why we need to commemorate icons.
Doctor, you know, in terms of an African continental stance, I mean, let's talk about the influence of a leader that Tata Madiba was, and if his values have been emulated by any of the African leaders in the current democratic dispensation.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon to your viewers.
Welcome.
You know, it's such a great honor, you know, to have remembered the icon of Nelson Mandela. 100 years back, he suffered, he sacrificed his life, you know, to the freedom that everybody is trying to enjoy at the moment, and also the history which we have made today of President Obama, you know, to come and give us a lecture to remind us on the ideology and the principles of what Mandela stood for. Also have to mention that the run-up to the campaigns for President Obama in 2008 and 2013, he actually mentioned on numerous times that he looked up to President Nelson Mandela, you know, as a pillar, a beacon, you know, to give people hope, and of which he has been speaking about hope and making our generation happy, and just with the hope and give ourselves a chance. You know, with the African community, I'm quite actually disappointed that I did not see most of the representation from 55 countries in Africa, you know, to come at this important event of the lecture of the centenary of Nelson Mandela. You know, I was with the view that we're gonna see a lot of, I don't know if they were invited or not invited, but it was my belief that we're going to see a lot of, especially former presidents, the current presidents, to come and show the support to South Africa for producing such an icon who had selfless gains, you know, to his country, who united the country after so many atrocities and apartheid, you know, who even actually only served one term of a 5-year term to specifically change the constitution and guide the people, the African people, into one direction, and he left. you know, comparing to some of the leaders who Africa has produced, you know, who's been onto the hymn of power, like Yoweri Museveni, in Uganda, he's been there from 1986. These leaders can't leave the power, you know, they still pushing to save Africa. You know, we hear what is happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where President Kabila has overstayed his term in office and is still hanging on to power. You know, we expected those leaders to come to that stage that we are helping into Africa and driving Africa forward.
You know, Professor, back to your earlier point there when you said that he was the best person to actually deliver the speech. You know, there has been a lot of criticism saying that whilst Barack Obama was still in office, he never did much to further African policies within, of course, the Western policies. What do you think about that notion? And do you feel that today's speech, which everybody was expecting that is going to take a serious swipe at the current political state in the West, do you think those issues came through in the speech?
It did. 2 points. The last part of your question.
Yes.
I think that he was quite emphatic on the unequal nature of global relations and the exploitative nature of capitalism. That capital and how the economies function today is quite different from 20 or so years ago.
Absolutely. He says we have a hidden racial nationalism, capitalism, functioning governments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And people who are happy amassing wealth without any sense of social responsibility. And we need policies that are sensitive to the plight of the poor. We need to be sensitive to income inequality, provide access to health. So he was quite critical, especially highlighting issues like the rise of right-wing populism.
Global elite, he calls them.
You know, and which is quite absurd, right? I mean, you look at, I think he also mentioned this, you look at the team that just won the World Cup in France. I mean, that's an African team, literally.
True.
And they've gone ahead to enrich France. France would be poorer without those Africans.
That's true.
So to the rise of right-wing populism goes against current trends, right? In that the world is integrating. The world has become, nations have become dependent on each other through finances, through trade, through culture. That you cannot keep yourself, insist on being an island. It will not necessarily work out like that. And Mandela's iconic stature affirms the universality of humanity.
Yes. That
someone who was born in Mvezo 1918, you know, imprisoned in 1960-61, would become an iconic figure with whom people across the world sympathize with, because he represented the injustice. Humanity has an innate revulsion to injustice. No one wants to be treated unfairly.
That's true.
And of course, his rise is also informative of the rise of television, interestingly, because he became an iconic figure with the launch of CNN in the early 1980s. And that coincided.
Social media.
Well, social media comes now, you know. So the ANC was quite smart about using him as an icon, as the face of the anti-apartheid struggle. And of course, Winnie was very vocal, and Winnie being pretty and all, of course. So she articulated the struggle, she articulated the plight of South Africans. And the ANC, in as much as it was uncomfortable about personalizing the struggle, used this iconic, handsome, tall figure with Winnie as this powerful lady behind, or next to him, actually, because at a time when most people were quiet, Winnie was the only one who was quite vocal. And it became it was the first international anti-colonial struggle of the 20th century, made quite possible by how the ANC was able to build this international network, using the South African question as a question of human rights, that no individual, regardless of their racial complexion, is inferior to the other. So that story of humanity appealed to everyone, and of course TV made that even more possible. So for me, I think those are the two key things. And of course, Obama, your question about whether or not he did what he did for Africa was enough or not. Of course, there were a lot of expectations, but he worked within certain constraints. in America. He couldn't have done more than perhaps what was provided by AGOA, for instance. He did, of course, visit and highlight the plight of vulnerable people in Africa. So perhaps to have demanded that he could have done more than he did was a little bit displaced, because, you know, America, even with his own agenda in the U.S., U.S. still has right-wing racist folks who have resurfaced now. So he continued to face a lot of obstacles, but he did what he could, given the constraints that he faced at the time.
Absolutely, and he does still say now, Professor, when they ask him why hasn't he been very vocal about the Trump administration, he says that he believes that America has one president at a time and he will let him do his job. For now, though, I'm going to give you a chance to speak just now, Dr. Senkala. Obama did speak about how Madiba actually inspired hope. Let's listen in.
He came to embody the universal aspirations of dispossessed people all around the world, their hopes for a better life, the possibility of a moral transformation in the conduct of human affairs. Madiba's light shone so brightly, even from that narrow Robben Island cell, that in the late 70s, he could inspire a young college student on the other side of the world to re-examine his own priorities, could make me consider the small role I might play in bending the arc of the world towards justice. And when later, as a law student, I witnessed Madiba emerge from prison just a few months, you'll recall, after the fall of the Berlin Wall, I felt the same wave of hope that washed through hearts all around the world. You remember that feeling? It seemed as if the forces of progress were on the march, that they were inexorable. Each step he took, you felt this is the moment when the old structures of violence and repression and ancient hatreds that had so long stunted people's lives and confined the human spirit, that all that was crumbling before our eyes. And then, as Madiba guided this nation through negotiation, painstakingly, reconciliation, its first fair and free elections, as we all witnessed the grace and the generosity with which he embraced former enemies, the wisdom for him to step away from power once he felt his job was complete. We understood that it was not just the subjugated, the oppressed who were being freed from the shackles of the past. The subjugator was being offered a gift, being given a chance to see in a new way, being given a chance to participate in the work of building a better world.
All right, let's look at the concert clip now.